this story is one of the few in the 3-year cycle of the lectionary that never changes. We always read this encounter with the resurrected Jesus on the Sunday after Easter. And it's often understood in negative terms. Thomas is most famously known as, obviously, Doubting Thomas, the cynic, the holdout. His, shall we say, reluctance to believe the testimony of his fellow disciples, his friends, his insistence on seeing Jesus, his late arrival to the joyous belief of his peers. These are often described as spiritual flaws, as signs of stubbornness or of a weak faith. Perhaps now in the 21st century we might see them as working out possibly the stages of grief, denial, anger, bitterness, you name it. So what do we see in Thomas? Most people, interpretation of Thomas, they would see weakness. But is that what we really see in Thomas? As one commentator notes, they see a man who has yearned for a living encounter with Jesus. He wanted the same experience as his friends. He's a man who wouldn't settle for somebody else's experience of the resurrection. Okay, it's happened to you, but I also want it to happen to me. He stuck around because of the hope of having his own personal encounter. He's a man who dared to confess, this is the important part I think, uncertainty in the midst of those who were certain. He's a man who recognised his Lord through his woundedness, not glory. According to John's Gospel, Thomas had to wait in suspense for 8 days, it says. 8 days after his friends had first told him that they'd seen Jesus. So what, I wonder, did that 8 days feel like for the disciple who missed Jesus first time round? I mean, let's face it, we've heard the Archbishop of Canterbury talk about Prince Philip's death, saying that death is brutal. Death appears to be final. Did he pity his fellow disciples, Thomas, for their grief-stricken delusions? Or did he fear, as perhaps many of us do, that we'd missed the memo, missed the boat, missed the glory, that he was ever destined just to know God second hand? I mean, often I heard testimonies from people about their experience with God, but I never had it myself directly until a bit later on. So did I feel as though I was destined to know God second hand? And I was desperate for that first hand experience. But what's moving and revealing about this encounter is that Jesus met Thomas right where he was, freely offering Thomas the testimony of his own wounds, of his own pain. And after such an encounter, I can only imagine the tenderness and urgency with which Thomas was able to repeat Christ's words to other doubters, other seekers. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Because isn't this all of us on the Sunday after Easter? Don't we all wrestle with hidden doubts, hidden fears? Don't we all wonder sometimes if the miracle of the resurrection will hold in the mess of our everyday lives? I mean, it's easy for me to talk about resurrection every time I take a funeral service. It's easy for the Archbishop of Canterbury to talk about the Christian hope is one of the resurrection. But that still seems to, well, not quite sweep aside, but doesn't seem quite to acknowledge the grief that the bereaved are going through at the time. And perhaps Thomas was going through mega grief. And perhaps we, in our own fears, doubts, etc., when people talk about the resurrection, that all will be well, in all manner of things, all will be well. We think, well, that's okay for you, but it's not my experience right now. Thomas's story reminds me that resurrection is hard. It's hard from the get-go, and it's still hard now. It's hard to accept, hard to internalise, hard, I believe, to apply to our lives, especially when our lives are marked, as I've already suggested, by pain, loss, uncertainty, and ultimately death. If nothing else, Thomas, his story, reassures me that faith doesn't have to be straightforward. It's not linear. It's not binary. The business of accepting the resurrection, of living it out, of sharing it with the world, it's tough. It's okay to waver. It's okay to take our time. It's okay to hope for more. John's desire for his readers was that they would ultimately come to believe. And the implication of this is that belief is not instantaneous for many people. And maybe this is why the earliest Christians referred to the new faith as the way. A way is not a destination. It's a road to walk. It's an invitation to journey. It takes time. It's all about the journey. I don't know whether you saw some of the programmes they've been on, I think they were on a while ago now, about so-called celebrities walking the way. Some going to St. James de Compostela, and some going to Constantinople, etc. But all from different backgrounds, all with different faith experiences, all with different faiths. But they talked about what their faith meant to them on that journey. It takes time, and for them, as for us, it's all about the journey. John chose an encounter between doubts and scars to help us come to belief. And this year, maybe more than ever, this seems apposite. Why? Because this is what I recognise after the past 14 months of COVID. We've acknowledged social isolation, furloughing, redundancies, more people than before queuing in food banks. And we've heard more and more political spin about this, that or the other. So though I believe we are a resurrection people, I also believe that we are a people in pain. The world around us is still wounded, and the scars we're carrying from this past year are likely to last yet for a long, long time. So in these circumstances, when Jesus stands there before Thomas, with his hands and with his side, his scarred body resonates for us in so many ways. We recognise his scars in the faces of those who have lost loved ones to the disease. We watch people bleed afresh in the aftermath of cancelled hospital appointments, treatments, and resulting deaths. I'll never, ever, ever forget being told at the beginning of January last year, getting a phone call from the nurse saying that Maggie's cancer tumour had responded well to the treatment. And then we were due another telephone call a month later, a visit to Weston Park a month later, saying, "I'm sorry, but everything's been cancelled. We're no longer doing treatments." So that was beginning of January, and it's only when Maggie had a stroke in May, and we were at Rotherham, that we found out that the tumour had grown again. Maggie's only one person, or was one person, who's had a hospital appointment cancelled, treatments cancelled. and one of many who have died because of that decision made by people. We also see the physical and psychological scars caused by the closure of high street shops. Who'd have thought that John Lewis would end up closing the majority of their shops and making people redundant? We've seen increased levels of redundancies, increased levels of isolation, mental problems on the increase in anxiety from individuals. So this year in particular, the picture of Thomas moving his fingers across Jesus' scars to experience a birthing of faith resonates, I believe, with what we've all experienced in these last 14 months or so. And if we reflect on it long enough, it might bring us to our knees. Jesus and his scars are everywhere. So if you're finding the joy of Easter difficult to access right now, rest in the fact that we have a wonderful example in Thomas, that Thomas took his time. And lean into that amazing truth that Jesus allowed him to do so. Hang on to the fact that Jesus opened a way for Thomas through the marks of his own suffering and trauma, sharing his broken body so that Thomas could find a way to wholeness. And it's something that we will partake in just a few moments' time when we share the bread, the wafer. That's the body of Christ, the broken body of Christ, making each one of us whole. So consider the impact and the attractiveness of a faith community that holds space for the wary and for the sceptical. That here in church, it's okay not to be okay. It's a safe place, or it should be. So contemplate the wonderful story of a determined doubter who gradually found his way to faith, who came to see the wounded Messiah as the Lord and God in his own time. The story that comes after Easter is a story of scars and doubts, yes, but it's a tremendous gift. So think about it, think on it, so that you may come to believe. Amen.